Before you fall asleep, before thought begins to fade, there is something already working on you. It has no shape, no color, no physical form you can hold, yet it reaches deeper than almost anything else. Sound enters the body without asking permission. It bypasses logic. It slips past language. It touches the nervous system directly, altering breathing, slowing the heart, reshaping emotion before the mind even notices. Music is not entertainment first, it is influence. And tonight, as you listen, that influence is already unfolding. Long before humans understood chemistry or neuroscience, they understood rhythm. A steady beat could calm a restless group. A low tone could signal safety. A rising melody could prepare the body for movement or release. This was not learned through theory, but through survival. The brain evolved to respond to sound as information, not decoration. Even now, your nervous system treats music as instruction. Each frequency carries a subtle command: slow down, let go, stay alert, or rest. Music speaks the language the body learned before words existed. What makes music so powerful is not what it means, but how it behaves. Sound is vibration. Vibration becomes movement. Movement becomes change inside the brain and body. Neurochemicals shift. Muscle tension adjusts. Brain waves begin to synchronize. Without effort, without intention, the mind starts to follow patterns it did not choose consciously. This is why a melody can make you feel something you were not expecting, or why a certain sound can bring calm even when thoughts are loud. Music does not argue with the mind, it guides it. As night approaches, this guidance becomes even stronger. When the brain begins its descent towards sleep, it becomes more suggestible, more receptive, more responsive to rhythm and tone. Music can slow the transition gently, smoothing the edges of thought, stretching moments into softness. It can become a bridge between waking and dreaming, between tension and rest, between awareness and surrender. This is not coincidence. It is biology responding exactly as it was designed to. Tonight's journey is not about listening harder. It is about letting sound do what it has always done best: carry you, organize you, settle the system beneath thought. Each section you hear will move deeper into the science behind this quiet power, how music reshapes emotion, memory, time, and even consciousness itself. You do not need to understand it consciously, your body already does. So as the sound continues, allow attention to loosen. Let rhythm become background. Let melody become space. Nothing needs to be followed. Nothing needs to be held. Music has been guiding human minds into calm long before this moment, and it will continue now, gently, precisely, exactly as needed. Sound is not an object, yet it builds structures inside the mind with remarkable precision. Long before it becomes music, sound exists as organized movement, pressure waves traveling through air, through skin, through bone, quietly rearranging the state of the nervous system. These waves do not ask to be interpreted. They arrive, they vibrate, and they begin to shape internal space. The brain does not hear sound as decoration. It maps it. It measures timing, amplitude, frequency, and rhythm, then uses these measurements to predict what comes next. In this way, sound becomes architecture, an invisible framework that organizes perception, emotion, and attention. Neuroscience shows that the brain is constantly searching for patterns. When sound enters the auditory system, it is broken down almost instantly into components: tempo, pitch, harmonic relationships, repetition. These elements are processed across multiple regions at once. The auditory cortex decodes structure, the limbic system evaluates emotional relevance, and deeper brain areas adjust arousal levels without conscious input. This happens faster than thought. Before meaning appears, before preference forms, the body has already responded. Muscles adjust their tension, breathing subtly shifts, the heart begins to align with rhythm. Sound does not wait for permission. It reorganizes first, explains later. This is why music can feel spatial rather than temporal. You do not simply hear it pass. You feel yourself times inside, times it. Sustained tones create a sense of openness. Repetition creates stability. Slow rhythms expand internal time, making moments feel longer and softer. From a biological perspective, this is not imagination, it is entrainment. Neural oscillations begin to synchronize with external rhythms. Brain waves adjust their pace. The internal clock slows. Sound becomes a structure the mind can rest within, rather than a sequence it must follow. At low frequencies, this architectural effect deepens. Slower vibrations interact more directly with the body, traveling through tissue rather than stopping at the ears. These frequencies are felt as much as they are heard. They create grounding. They signal safety. Evolutionarily, low, steady sounds often meant continuity, wind, water, distant movement without threat. The nervous system learned to associate these patterns with non-emergency states. When such sounds are present, the brain reduces vigilance. Cortisol levels begin to drop. Parasympathetic activity increases. The body prepares for rest long before sleep arrives. What makes this process hypnotic is not mystery, but predictability. The brain relaxes when it can anticipate what comes next. Music that unfolds slowly, with gentle repetition and minimal surprise, allows prediction to become effortless. Once prediction stabilizes, attention no longer needs to stay sharp. Thought loosens. Awareness widens, then softens. This is why certain musical structures feel immersive rather than stimulating. They are not pulling the mind forward, they are holding it in place. Over time, sound builds an internal environment. Just as physical architecture shapes how people move through space, sonic architecture shapes how the mind moves through states of awareness. Sharp, irregular sounds create alertness and tension. Smooth, continuous sounds create safety and release. Music designed for rest does not force emotion. It creates conditions. It constructs a space where calm becomes the most natural response available. The mind does not fall asleep because it is told to. It falls asleep because the environment, external and internal, has been carefully arranged. In this sense, music is not something you listen to. It is something you inhabit. Each frequency is a wall or an opening. Each rhythm is a pathway. Each sustained tone is a ceiling that lowers gently, narrowing attention until nothing remains to be held. The invisible architecture of sound does not trap the mind. It supports it, quietly, precisely, allowing awareness to settle into a shape where effort is no longer required. And as this structure completes itself around you, there is nothing left to build. The sound holds, the body responds, thought slows. The architecture stands unseen, unfelt as effort, yet deeply present, guiding the mind toward rest without instruction, without urgency, exactly as it was always designed to do. Sound reaches you before you are aware of listening. Long before a thought forms, vibration has already crossed the boundary between outside and inside. The ears are not passive receivers, they are biological translators designed to convert movement into neural instruction. As sound waves enter the ear canal, they begin a chain reaction that ends not in hearing, but in regulation. Tiny bones amplify vibration. Fluid-filled chambers transform motion into electrical signals. Neurons fire in precise timing patterns that tell the brain not just times what times is present, but times how to prepare asterisk. The body is informed before the mind has time to interpret. This early arrival is crucial. Unlike visual information, which requires attention and orientation, sound surrounds. It reaches you even with closed eyes, even in darkness, even when awareness is drifting. Evolution shaped the auditory system as an early warning and early soothing channel. A sudden, sharp sound triggers alertness instantly. A continuous, low-frequency sound does the opposite. It signals stability. The nervous system responds automatically, adjusting arousal levels without consulting conscious thought. Sound does not ask you to decide. It decides first, then lets awareness catch up. Once these signals reach the brainstem, regulation begins. Breathing patterns subtly shift in response to rhythm. Slower tempos encourage longer exhalations, which activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for rest, digestion, and recovery. Heart rate begins to synchronize, not mechanically, but probabilistically, drifting toward the tempo it perceives. Muscle tone softens. The body does not relax because it understands music. It relaxes because vibration has reorganized its internal timing. At the same time, deeper structures become involved. The limbic system evaluates sound not for meaning, but for emotional relevance. Certain harmonic patterns reduce threat detection. Predictable progressions lower uncertainty. Repetition builds familiarity, and familiarity signals safety. Dopamine and serotonin shift subtly, not in the explosive way of stimulation, but in the gentle recalibration associated with calm. This chemistry is quiet, but persistent. It does not excite the system, it settles it. What makes this process hypnotic is its inevitability. There is no effort required to follow sound into the body. You cannot stop vibration from moving through tissue. Low frequencies travel through bone. Sustained tones resonate in cavities. Even silence carries pressure changes that the nervous system registers. Listening is not an action, it is a condition. And because it is unavoidable, it becomes a powerful channel for guiding states of consciousness. As the body responds, the mind begins to follow. Thought slows not because it is commanded to, but because the physiological conditions that support rapid thinking are no longer prioritized. Alertness fades gently into awareness. Awareness softens into presence. Presence stretches into something quieter. This transition feels natural because it mirrors the body's internal state. When the body feels safe, the mind releases vigilance. When vigilance dissolves, thought loses urgency. Sound becomes the bridge that carries the system from effort into ease. Over time, this creates trust. The nervous system learns that certain sonic environments are predictable and non-threatening. Each exposure deepens the association. The body begins to relax faster. the mind lets go sooner. This is why music designed for rest becomes more effective with repetition. It trains the system not through instruction, but through experience. The body remembers patterns long after words fade. So sound enters first as movement, then as regulation, and only later as meaning. It reshapes the internal environment before awareness can resist. By the time you notice yourself calming, the process is already well underway. The architecture has been built, the signals have been delivered. The system has begun its descent toward rest. And all of this happens not because you tried to relax, but because sound arrived and the body listened exactly as it was designed to. Rhythm is the part of sound the body understands most deeply, because rhythm existed before melody, before language, before conscious listening. It is repetition in time, and repetition is how biological systems learn stability. Every living process is rhythmic at its core. The heart contracts and releases, lungs expand and soften. Neurons fire in oscillations. Even sleep itself unfolds in cycles, descending and rising through stages with quiet regularity. When external rhythm enters the body, it does not introduce something foreign. It aligns with something already present. This alignment is known as entrainment, the tendency of biological rhythms to synchronize with external patterns. When a steady rhythm is present, the nervous system begins to match it without instruction. Breathing adjusts its pace. Heart rate variability shifts. Brain waves subtly reorganize. This is not imitation, but cooperation. The body recognizes rhythm as a stabilizing signal, something it can trust enough to follow. Faster rhythms elevate alertness. Slower rhythms invite release. The nervous system does not debate these signals. It responds. What makes rhythm so powerful is its predictability. The brain is constantly trying to reduce uncertainty. Every unpredictable event demands attention. Every surprise costs energy. Rhythm removes surprise. When the next beat is expected, vigilance is no longer required. Attention loosens. The system conserves energy. Over time, this conservation becomes calm. Calm is not emptiness, it is efficiency. The brain stops scanning for threats and begins to idle smoothly, using only what is needed. As rhythm slows, its influence deepens. Slow, regular pulses extend the space between moments. Subjectively, time begins to stretch. Seconds feel longer. Thought loses its urgency. This is not illusion. It is a measurable shift in temporal processing. The brain's internal timing mechanisms adjust, recalibrating how duration is perceived. With fewer changes to track, awareness becomes less fragmented. Experience smooths out. The mind is no longer jumping, it is drifting. This drift is where hypnosis begins to appear, not as control, but as cooperation. The nervous system allows itself to be guided because guidance feels safe. Rhythm becomes a soft authority, not demanding attention, only offering consistency. As long as the pattern continues, the system remains settled. This is why irregular or interrupted rhythms can feel disturbing, while continuous ones feel reassuring. Continuity signals that nothing urgent is happening. The body responds by letting go. Over repeated exposure, rhythm becomes conditioning. The nervous system learns that certain tempos are associated with rest, with non-demand, with sleep. The response becomes faster and more automatic each time. The body no longer waits for permission from thought. It recognizes the rhythm and begins the descent on its own. This is not dependence, it is learning. Just as daylight teaches the body when to wake, rhythm teaches it when to release. In this way, rhythm becomes an invisible organizer. It arranges internal processes without ever announcing itself. It does not carry meaning, story, or emotion directly. It carries timing. And timing is everything. When internal timing slows, everything else follows. Muscles soften, breathing deepens, thought spaces widen. The system moves toward rest, not because it was instructed to, but because it was gently synchronized. So when you hear a steady rhythm now, notice how little effort it requires to follow it. Notice how the body responds before the mind does. Rhythm is not asking you to listen closely. It is asking you to allow alignment, and once alignment begins, the rest of the journey unfolds naturally, one repetition at a time, smooth, predictable, and quietly irresistible. As rhythm settles, the nervous system and vibration reorganizes the body, sound begins to change its role. It is no longer something happening times to times you. It becomes something you are times inside asterisk. At this point, sound stops behaving like an event in time and starts functioning like an environment. The brain no longer tracks it moment by moment. Instead, it treats sound as a stable background, a sonic landscape that does not require attention. This shift is subtle but profound. Attention disengages not because it is forced away, but because there is nothing urgent left to monitor. Neuroscientifically, this is the moment when sensory processing becomes diffuse rather than focused. The brain reduces its effort to localize and analyze sound precisely. Instead of asking where it comes from or what it means, it allows sound to occupy space passively. This reduces cognitive load. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for monitoring, planning, and evaluation, becomes less active. In its place, slower, more distributed networks dominate networks associated with rest, internal awareness, and the early stages of sleep. Sound no longer stimulates thinking, it supports drifting. This is why sustained tones, gentle harmonies, and continuous ambient textures feel so different from structured, attention-demanding music. They do not pull the mind forward, they hold it gently in place. There is no expectation of change, no tension waiting to be resolved. The nervous system interprets this stability as permission to disengage from control. Muscles release further. Breathing deepens again. Awareness widens, then softens, no longer anchored to specific moments. Over time, sound begins to feel spatial rather than temporal. It creates a sense of enclosure, like being wrapped rather than guided. This is not imagination. It is the brain constructing an internal environment from consistent sensory input. Just as darkness creates a visual space for rest, sound creates an auditory space that replaces the need for vigilance. Inside this space, thought loses its sharp edges. Memories drift without attachment. Images arise and dissolve without narrative. Consciousness enters a transitional state where effort is no longer required. At this stage, hypnosis is no longer a technique. It is a condition. The mind is not being led anywhere. It is simply no longer resisting. Sound becomes a container that holds awareness without asking it to do anything. This is why sleep-oriented music works best when it does not demand emotion or progression. Its power lies in consistency, not expression. The body does not need to be entertained, it needs to be held. As this sonic space stabilizes, the boundary between listening and resting disappears. you are not listening to the sound anymore. The sound is listening to you, adjusting nothing, expecting nothing, remaining exactly as it is. And in that constancy, the system finds safety. Safety allows release. Release allows descent. The architecture completes itself without effort. This is the final function of sound at this depth. Not stimulation, not instruction, not meaning but shelter. A quiet, invisible structure the mind can rest within while control fades naturally. The sound does not end, it continues. And because it continues, nothing else needs to. The first architecture is complete. Music does its most profound work when it is no longer noticed. Once sound has settled into the background, once rhythm has synchronized the nervous system and vibration has softened the body, a quieter process begins. The brain starts to change, not through stimulation, but through absence. Silence is not the absence of sound here, it is the absence of effort. In this state, music no longer competes for attention. It becomes a steady influence, quietly reshaping neural activity without interruption. This is where rewriting begins. Neuroscience shows that the brain is constantly adapting, even in rest. Neural pathways strengthen or weaken based on patterns of use, emotional context, and internal state. When music creates a calm, predictable environment, it encourages the brain to shift away from high-alert networks and towards slower, integrative ones. The default mode network associated with introspection, memory consolidation, and self-referential thought begins to dominate. At the same time, stress-related circuits reduce their activity. Cortisol levels decline gradually. The brain is not being commanded to relax. It is being given conditions where relaxation becomes the most efficient option. What makes this rewriting subtle is that it happens below conscious awareness. The mind may feel as though it is drifting, doing nothing, yet neural activity is reorganizing continuously. Brainwaves transition from faster beta patterns toward alpha and theta states, frequencies associated with calm focus, creativity, and the edge of sleep. These shifts alter how information is processed. Thoughts become less linear. Emotional charge softens. Memories lose urgency. The brain is not emptying, it is rebalancing. In this silent rewriting, repetition plays a critical role. Gentle musical patterns repeated over time signal reliability. Reliability reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty lowers the need for vigilance. Over repeated exposures, the brain begins to associate these sonic environments with safety and rest. This association becomes learned. Each time the music returns, the brain reaches calm faster, with less resistance. The pathway is already prepared. Silence is no longer unfamiliar, it is anticipated. Importantly, this process does not erase thought or emotion. It changes their weight. Worries may still arise, but they no longer dominate. Feelings may surface, but they pass without attachment. Music provides a steady reference point, allowing internal events to move through without needing resolution. This is why silence shaped by sound feels different from silence alone. Pure silence can feel empty or unsettling. Musical silence feels held. The brain relaxes because it is not alone in its quiet. Over time, this gentle rewriting accumulates. Neural flexibility increases. The nervous system becomes more resilient, less reactive. Sleep deepens. Recovery improves. The brain learns that not every moment requires analysis or control. Music teaches this lesson repeatedly, without language, without instruction, simply by being present and consistent. The rewriting is not dramatic. It is gradual, almost invisible, yet deeply effective. As awareness drifts further, the distinction between music and silence continues to blur. Sound becomes less of an event and more of a condition. The brain stops tracking it actively, yet the influence remains. Neural rhythms stay aligned. Emotional tone stays softened. The system remains guided even when attention fades. This is the quiet power of music at its deepest level, not what it adds, but what it allows to fall away. So the brain is rewritten not through force, but through permission. Music creates an environment where silence feels safe, predictable, and supportive. In that environment, the brain naturally reorganizes toward balance. Nothing is imposed, nothing is rushed. The rewriting happens because the system finally has space to do what it has always known how to do: settle, integrate, and rest. When music settles into the background and becomes predictable, the brain enters a rare condition where change can happen without resistance. This is the domain of neural plasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on experience. Plasticity is often associated with effort, learning, repetition, and focus. Yet some of the most durable changes occur during states of low arousal. Gentle, continuous sound creates exactly this state. It reduces threat perception, quiets evaluative thinking, and allows neural circuits to reorganize without interruption. The brain does not need to be pushed into change. It changes because nothing is preventing it. In high alert states, the brain prioritizes survival. Energy is directed toward prediction, control, and rapid response. Plasticity narrows under these conditions because stability becomes more important than exploration. Music designed for calm reverses this priority. As sound lowers arousal, the brain shifts resources away from vigilance and toward integration. Neural networks that are usually kept separate begin to communicate more freely. Memory, emotion, and sensory processing soften their boundaries. This is not randomness, it is flexibility returning. The brain becomes more receptive precisely because it feels safe enough to stop defending its existing patterns. What makes gentle sound especially effective is its non-intrusive nature. Loud, complex, or emotionally demanding music can still activate stress and expectation. Slow, ambient, and harmonically simple sound does the opposite. It reduces the need for prediction. When the brain can accurately anticipate what comes next, it relaxes its grip on control. This relaxation opens a window where old patterns can weaken and new ones can form. Over time, repeated exposure to this state reshapes baseline neural activity. Calm becomes easier to access. Reactivity diminishes. The nervous system learns a different default. This process is reinforced during transitions towards sleep. As consciousness drifts, the brain naturally enters theta-dominant states associated with memory consolidation and emotional processing. Music that maintains gentle continuity supports this transition, preventing abrupt awakenings while allowing deep integration to occur. Experiences from the day are reorganized, emotional charge is redistributed. The brain quietly edits itself, keeping what is useful and releasing what is not. Sound does not interfere with this editing. It protects it by maintaining a stable external environment. Over weeks and months, these effects accumulate. Neural pathways associated with stress lose strength through disuse. Pathways associated with regulation, calm attention, and internal awareness become more efficient. This is not temporary relaxation. It is learning at the level of the nervous system. The brain remembers what it feels like to be unthreatened. Each time the music returns, the system responds faster, with less effort, because the pathway has already been laid down. Plasticity has already done its work. So gentle sound does not overwrite the brain aggressively. It offers a context where rewriting becomes the easiest option available. In that context, the brain chooses efficiency over defense, integration over control. The result is subtle but profound. A nervous system that gradually learns how to remain settled even in silence, long after the music continues quietly in the background. When the brain relaxes into the safety created by gentle music, memory and emotion begin a slow, almost invisible reorganization. Memory is not stored as a static archive. It is constantly rewritten each time it is recalled, reweighted by emotional context and physiological state. Under stress, memories become sharper, heavier, and more urgent. Under calm conditions, their edges soften. Music does not erase memory, it changes how memory is held. By lowering arousal, sound reduces the emotional charge attached to recollection, allowing experiences to be stored with less tension and more neutrality. This is one of the most powerful forms of reprogramming the brain can undergo. Emotion follows a similar pattern. The limbic system does not distinguish between external threat and internal stress. It responds to overall state. When music stabilizes breathing, heart rate, and neural rhythm, emotional centers receive a signal that the environment is safe. In response, they reduce amplification. Feelings still arise, but they do not escalate. Anxiety loses momentum. Sadness becomes spacious rather than heavy. Even joy becomes quieter, less demanding. This does not flatten emotion, it regulates it. The nervous system learns that emotion does not require immediate reaction. It can simply exist and pass. This quiet reprogramming is especially effective because it occurs without confrontation. The brain is not asked to analyze, label, or resolve emotion. It is simply allowed to experience a different internal state while memories and feelings move through it. Over time, this creates new associations. The brain begins to link calm physiological states with emotional processing. Difficult thoughts no longer automatically trigger tension. The system remembers that it can remain settled even while processing complexity. This is not cognitive change, it is embodied learning. Music supports this process by providing continuity. The steady presence of sound acts as an anchor, preventing abrupt shifts in attention that might reactivate stress circuits. As memories surface and dissolve, the music remains unchanged. This constancy teaches the brain that internal fluctuation does not require external response. Nothing needs to be fixed. Nothing needs to be pushed away. The brain learns to observe rather than intervene. This observational stance is a hallmark of deep regulation and emotional resilience. During this state, the hippocampus, central to memory integration, becomes particularly active. It sorts experiences, contextualizes emotion, and links present calm with past events. This is why music often brings memories to the surface during relaxed states. The brain is integrating them under new conditions, Old emotional patterns are revisited in a safer internal environment. Over repeated sessions, this reshaping becomes lasting. The emotional tone of memory changes, reactivity decreases, perspective widens. What makes this process hypnotic is its gentleness. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no moment of breakthrough. Change accumulates quietly beneath awareness, like sediment settling in water. One session alone may feel subtle. Over time, the nervous system becomes noticeably lighter. Emotional responses become slower and less intense. Memory feels less intrusive. The brain has not forgotten, it has learned how to hold experience differently. So music rewrites memory and emotion not by rewriting content, but by rewriting context. It teaches the brain what it feels like to process experience without threat. Once that lesson is learned, it remains accessible even in silence. The sound may fade, but the reprogramming continues, quietly reshaping how the mind relates to its own inner world. At the deepest level of this process, the brain begins to learn something it was never explicitly taught: that silence is not a problem to be solved. Most waking cognition is organized around noise, external stimulation, internal dialogue, constant evaluation. The brain becomes efficient at reacting, predicting, and correcting, but inefficient at resting. Gentle music changes this relationship slowly, not by forcing silence, but by reframing it. Silence becomes something the brain can enter without losing orientation. The absence of urgency stops feeling like emptiness and starts feeling like stability. This shift is subtle, yet it marks a profound change in how the nervous system understands itself. Neuroscientifically, this is reflected in reduced activity in monitoring networks that normally scan for errors, threats, or unresolved tasks. The brain stops checking itself repeatedly. Predictive loops loosen. The constant question of "what next?" fades into the background. In its place, a simpler mode emerges, one that does not seek stimulation, resolution, or meaning. It simply maintains balance. Music acts as a transitional scaffold here. It holds the system steady long enough for the brain to experience quiet without anxiety. Over time, the scaffold is no longer needed. This learning does not happen through insight. It happens through repetition. Each time the brain enters a calm, low-demand sonic environment and nothing goes wrong, its expectations adjust. The absence of threat becomes familiar. The nervous system recalibrates what it considers normal. Hypervigilance weakens, not because it is argued against, but because it is no longer useful. The brain chooses efficiency, and efficiency now includes stillness. As this new baseline forms, silence itself becomes restorative. The brain no longer rushes to fill gaps with thought. It allows space between moments. These spaces are not empty, they are integrative. During them, neural networks synchronize, information settles, and emotional tone stabilizes. Sleep becomes deeper because the brain no longer resists disengagement. Rest is no longer something that must be achieved. It is something that unfolds naturally once interference stops. Music's final role, then, is not to accompany thought, but to escort the brain to a place where thought is optional. Once there, the system recognizes the state and remembers it. Silence ceases to be unfamiliar territory. It becomes home. The brain has learned that nothing essential disappears when activity slows. Identity remains, awareness remains, only effort fades. This is the true rewriting that happens in silence, not the addition of new patterns, but the release of unnecessary ones. The brain learns that it does not need to be constantly active to remain intact. And once this lesson is learned, it persists beyond sound, beyond music, beyond conscious intention. Quiet becomes accessible at will because the nervous system has finally experienced it as safe. So the second architecture completes itself not in sound, but in what sound leaves behind. A brain that knows how to be quiet, a system that no longer resists rest, a mind that can settle without fear when stimulation fades. Music does not claim credit for this change, it simply provided the conditions. And once the conditions were experienced enough times, the brain did the rest on its own. Melody reaches the emotional core of the brain through chemistry long before it reaches meaning. What you feel when a sequence of notes unfolds is not an abstract response. It is a biochemical shift unfolding in real time. As melodic patterns rise and fall, the brain releases and withholds neurochemicals with remarkable precision. Dopamine responds to expectation and resolution, not to pleasure alone. When a melody hints at where it is going and then arrives gently, dopamine is released in small, sustained waves rather than sharp bursts. This creates a sense of warmth and coherence instead of excitement. Emotion becomes smooth rather than intense, regulated rather than overwhelming. At the same time, serotonin adjusts emotional tone and stability. Slow, consonant melodies increase serotonergic activity, supporting calm, rememberable states. This is why certain melodies feel comforting even without familiarity. They align with the brain's preference for predictability without monotony. Serotonin does not elevate mood suddenly, it steadies it. Under its influence, emotion loses its sharp edges, sadness becomes spacious, contentment becomes quiet. The system settles into emotional balance rather than emotional reaction. Oxytocin, often associated with bonding and safety, also responds to melodic continuity. Sustained melodic lines and gentle harmonic progressions signal non-threat, allowing the social brain to relax. Even when listening alone, the nervous system interprets these patterns as relationally safe. This is why music can feel like companionship without presence. The chemistry of trust is activated not because of words or meaning, but because the structure of melody mimics the rhythm of secure interaction, predictable, responsive, and non-demanding. Cortisol, the hormone most associated with stress, begins to decline as these other systems stabilize. Melody does not suppress stress chemically by force. It removes the conditions that maintain it. When prediction is easy, when surprise is minimal, when rhythm and pitch remain within gentle ranges, the brain stops signaling threat. Cortisol production slows, muscle tension reduces, emotional vigilance fades. The chemistry of emotion shifts from defense to maintenance. What makes melody uniquely powerful is that it coordinates these chemical systems simultaneously. It does not stimulate one pathway in isolation. It harmonizes multiple processes at once: reward, stability, bonding, and stress reduction into a single experience. This coordination is what gives melody its depth. Emotion does not spike, it unfolds. Feeling becomes something you can inhabit rather than something that overtakes you. Over repeated exposure, this chemical balance becomes learned. The brain remembers which melodic environments correspond to safety and regulation. Emotional responses become less volatile. recovery becomes faster. Even outside of music, the nervous system retains this recalibration. Melody has already taught it how to feel without urgency. So, when emotion softens under music, it is not imagination. It is chemistry adjusting quietly, precisely, without instruction. Melody does not tell the brain what to feel. It arranges conditions where feeling no longer needs to protect itself. And in that safety, emotion becomes something gentle, flowing, and finally at rest. Melody reshapes emotion not by overwhelming the brain with pleasure, but by carefully managing expectation. And expectation is the true language of dopamine. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the chemical of reward, yet its deeper role is anticipation, the quiet prediction of what might come next. When a melody unfolds slowly, offering hints rather than surprises, dopamine is released in restrained, sustained patterns. This creates a feeling of emotional coherence rather than excitement. The brain does not leap forward. It settles into a gentle readiness, a calm openness that allows emotion to exist without urgency or demand. This process depends heavily on timing. When melodic phrases resolve too quickly, dopamine spikes and collapses, producing stimulation rather than calm. When resolution is delayed and softened, dopamine spreads across time, smoothing emotional experience. The listener does not feel pulled toward a climax. Instead, they feel carried. Emotion becomes continuous rather than episodic. The nervous system prefers this continuity because it reduces energetic cost. There is no need to prepare for sudden change. The body relaxes into the expectation that nothing abrupt is required. As this pattern repeats, the brain begins to recalibrate how it anticipates experience more broadly. It learns that not all expectation leads to tension. Not all waiting requires vigilance. Melody teaches the nervous system that anticipation can be gentle, even comforting. This lesson extends beyond music. Daily experiences begin to feel less pressurized. Emotional reactions soften because the brain has learned a new default relationship with the future, one that does not demand constant readiness. At the same time, this dopamine modulation interacts with emotional memory. When anticipation remains calm, memories formed during these states carry less stress imprint. The brain tags experiences differently. They are stored with lower urgency and reduced emotional charge. This is why music heard during relaxed states often feels timeless rather than situational. The emotional memory does not anchor itself to tension or outcome. It floats, available without reactivation of stress. What makes this process hypnotic is its subtlety. There is no moment where the listener feels dopamine being adjusted. There is only a sense of emotional smoothness, a feeling that nothing needs to happen quickly. Thought slows because expectation no longer accelerates it. The mind stops leaning forward. Awareness spreads across the present moment rather than projecting into the next one. This is not sedation. It is emotional regulation through chemistry. Over time, repeated exposure to these melodic structures strengthens the brain's capacity for sustained emotional balance. Dopamine becomes less reactive, more stable. Emotional highs and lows flatten into gentler contours. The nervous system no longer equates anticipation with threat or urgency. Melody has quietly taught it that waiting can be safe. So when a melody feels emotionally soothing, it is not because it distracts you from feeling. It is because it reshapes how feeling unfolds in time. Dopamine no longer pulls emotion forward aggressively. It holds emotion gently in place, and in that holding, the system finally finds rest. While dopamine shapes expectation, serotonin is what allows emotion to settle into stability, and melody interacts with this system in a slower, deeper way. Serotonin does not create excitement or reward, it creates emotional ground. It tells the nervous system that conditions are adequate, that nothing urgent must be fixed, that the present moment is tolerable enough to remain in. When melodies unfold smoothly, without sharp jumps in pitch or rhythm, serotonergic pathways gradually increase their activity. This does not feel like happiness. It feels like emotional permission, the permission to stay where you are without needing to move, react, or resolve. This grounding effect is crucial for rest. In low serotonin states, the mind becomes restless even in the absence of threat. Thoughts search for problems. Emotion drifts toward dissatisfaction. Gentle melodic continuity counters this by stabilizing internal reference points. The brain no longer scans constantly for improvement or escape. It accepts the present configuration of sensation and feeling. Emotion does not disappear. It becomes anchored. Anxiety loses its momentum because there is nothing pushing it forward chemically. What makes serotonin modulation through melody especially powerful is its duration. Unlike dopamine, which responds quickly and fades quickly, serotonin shifts slowly and remains active over longer periods. This creates emotional persistence. Calm does not flicker, it holds. As melodies repeat, the brain begins to associate these sonic environments with emotional sufficiency. This association becomes learned. Over time, the nervous system begins to recreate similar emotional grounding even in silence. The music is no longer required continuously. The chemistry has already been trained. This stabilization also affects self-referential thought. When serotonin levels are balanced, the brain reduces compulsive internal narration. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer demand commentary or judgment. The sense of, "I must think about this," weakens. Identity softens. Awareness becomes more spacious and less centered on evaluation. This is why melodic music designed for rest often produces a feeling of quiet presence rather than emotional intensity. The chemistry supports being rather than doing. Emotionally, this creates safety without stimulation. The nervous system no longer confuses calm with boredom or danger. Stillness becomes acceptable. Silence becomes comfortable. The brain stops interpreting lack of stimulation as a problem. This is a major shift, especially for systems accustomed to constant input. Melody provides a transitional structure that makes this shift possible without shock. It eases the system into stability instead of forcing it. Over repeated listening, serotonergic balance becomes part of the nervous system's baseline. Emotional reactions slow, mood fluctuations become gentler, recovery from stress improves. The brain learns that it does not need constant novelty to remain regulated. Melody has taught it how to stay emotionally grounded in the absence of demand. So when music feels emotionally steady rather than exciting, it is not lacking power. It is working at a deeper chemical level. Serotonin is being adjusted quietly, patiently, teaching the nervous system how to remain present without tension. Emotion does not disappear. It becomes steady, and in that steadiness, rest finally becomes possible. At the deepest point of this chemical rebalancing, something subtle but decisive occurs. Emotion stops pressing for resolution. It does not vanish, and it does not become numb. It simply loses its sharp edge. The nervous system no longer treats feeling as a signal that demands action. Melody, working quietly through dopamine and serotonin together, creates an internal climate where emotion can exist without momentum. Feelings arise, linger briefly, and dissolve naturally, like waves that reach the shore without crashing. The brain recognizes that nothing needs to be done, and in that recognition, emotional effort fades. This shift is not intellectual, it is physiological. When stress chemistry recedes and stabilizing chemistry takes its place, the body stops bracing. Muscles soften without instruction, the jaw loosens. The space behind the eyes relaxes. These changes send feedback to the brain, reinforcing the message that the environment, both external and internal, is safe. Emotion no longer has to defend itself. It no longer needs to amplify to be noticed. It can exist quietly, without urgency, without demand. As this state deepens, the boundary between emotion and awareness becomes less rigid. Instead of being pulled into feeling, awareness begins to hold it gently. This is a crucial transition. The brain is no longer inside emotion. Emotion is inside awareness. Melody supports this shift by remaining constant while internal states fluctuate. The contrast teaches the nervous system that change does not require reaction. Stability can coexist with movement. The system learns to remain centered even as emotion passes through. Over time, this changes how the brain anticipates emotional experience altogether. The expectation of overwhelm weakens. The nervous system stops preparing for intensity before it arrives. Emotional forecasting becomes softer, less dramatic. This has lasting effects beyond music. Daily emotional experiences feel less intrusive. Recovery happens faster. The system no longer escalates preemptively. Melody has quietly retrained the chemistry of expectation and response. At this stage, the hypnotic quality of music is no longer about focus or absorption. It is about permission. Permission to feel without acting. Permission to experience without resolving. Permission to rest inside sensation without being pulled forward by it. The brain recognizes that nothing essential is lost when emotion loses its edge. In fact, clarity increases, presence deepens, the system becomes lighter. This is the final role of melody at the chemical level. It does not heighten emotion, it completes it. It brings feeling to a state where it no longer needs to push, demand, or insist. Emotion becomes information rather than pressure, and once emotion no longer pressures the system, the mind is free to let go. So the chemistry settles, the edges soften, the nervous system exhales completely. What remains is not emptiness, but emotional quiet, a state where feeling exists without effort, without resistance, without urgency. The third architecture completes itself here, not in intensity, but in balance. Rhythm is not something the nervous system listens to, it is something the nervous system times is asterisk. Long before conscious thought, before language, before memory, the body organized itself through repeating patterns. Heartbeats, breathing cycles, circadian rhythms, neural oscillations. Life stabilizes itself through repetition. When external rhythm appears, the nervous system does not treat it as information to analyze. It treats it as a reference signal, something to align with. This is why rhythm feels so immediately physical. It reaches the body before the mind has time to interpret it. From a biological perspective, rhythm acts as a timing authority. The brain is constantly coordinating millions of processes that must remain synchronized to function smoothly. When timing becomes chaotic, stress emerges. External rhythm provides an organizing scaffold. Slow, steady rhythms encourage coherence across systems. Breathing lengthens. Heart rate variability improves. Neural firing patterns become more regular. The nervous system relaxes not because rhythm is pleasant, but because it restores order. Order reduces energy expenditure. Reduced energy expenditure feels like calm. This process is driven by entrainment, the natural tendency of oscillating systems to synchronize when exposed to a stable external pattern. The brain does not resist entrainment, it seeks it. Predictable rhythm reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is metabolically expensive. When the next beat is expected, vigilance decreases. Attention loosens its grip. The system no longer needs to scan constantly for change. Rhythm becomes a promise that nothing sudden is required. The nervous system believes that promise instinctively. As rhythm slows, its influence deepens. Slow tempos interact directly with the vagus nerve, the primary pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system. Longer intervals between beats encourage longer exhalations, which signal safety to the brainstem. This cascades upward, reducing sympathetic activation and allowing rest and digest processes to dominate. Muscles release, blood pressure stabilizes, internal noise diminishes. The body does not decide to relax. It follows timing. What makes rhythm hypnotic is its reliability. Unlike melody or harmony, rhythm does not ask for interpretation. It simply continues. This continuity allows awareness to disengage from monitoring. Thought becomes less necessary. The nervous system no longer requires cognitive oversight. Control fades naturally. Rhythm becomes a background authority that replaces conscious regulation. The system trusts it enough to let go. Over repeated exposure, rhythm trains the nervous system. Certain tempos become associated with safety and rest. The response becomes faster each time. Eventually, the body begins to relax as soon as the pattern appears, before thought even registers it. This is not conditioning in the behavioral sense. It is alignment at the physiological level. Rhythm reminds the nervous system of its original pace, the pace it knew before urgency became habitual. So rhythm controls the nervous system not by force, but by familiarity. It speaks the body's native language. When rhythm slows, the system remembers how to slow. When rhythm steadies, the system remembers how to stabilize, and in that remembering, effort disappears. The body returns to coherence, not because it was instructed to, but because it was gently timed back into itself. Rhythm reaches into the body through the most fundamental channels of regulation, breath and heartbeat. These two systems are not independent mechanisms. They are deeply intertwined, constantly informing each other through neural feedback loops. When an external rhythm slows and stabilizes, breathing responds first. Inhalations become softer, exhalations lengthen, and pauses between breaths appear naturally without effort. This shift is not conscious. It is directed by brainstem centers that interpret slow, regular rhythm as a signal of safety. Once breathing changes, the heart follows, adjusting its variability to match the calmer internal pace. Heart rate variability is one of the clearest indicators of nervous system balance. Higher variability reflects flexibility, resilience, and parasympathetic dominance. Slow rhythm increases this variability by encouraging coherence between breath and heartbeat. Each exhalation gently slows the heart, each inhalation allows it to rise again. This rhythmic oscillation tells the nervous system that it does not need to lock into a rigid state. Flexibility replaces tension. The heart does not race or brace. It moves fluidly, guided by timing rather than force. As this coherence develops, the vagus nerve becomes increasingly active. This nerve is not a single pathway, but a complex network connecting the brain to the heart, lungs, and digestive system. Rhythm stimulates vagal tone indirectly by shaping breath patterns. When exhalations lengthen, vagal signaling increases, sending a powerful message upward. The environment is non-threatening. In response, stress hormones decline, inflammatory responses reduce, and the body shifts toward repair and recovery. Rhythm becomes a biological permission slip for rest. This process has a cascading effect on awareness. As breath and heart stabilize, the brain receives continuous confirmation that nothing urgent is happening. Monitoring systems reduce their activity. Attention loosens its focus. Thought slows because it no longer needs to coordinate bodily regulation manually. The system becomes self-regulating again, as it was designed to be. Rhythm does not replace control, it removes the need for it. Over time, repeated exposure to these rhythmic conditions retrains baseline physiology. The body learns that slower internal timing is not dangerous. Breath becomes deeper even outside of music. Heart rate recovers faster after stress. The nervous system retains the memory of coherence. Rhythm has not imposed calm, it has reminded the body how calm feels when nothing interferes. So rhythm controls breath and heart, not by overriding them, but by synchronizing them. It aligns systems that are meant to move together, but often fall out of sync under stress. When rhythm is present, alignment returns. And when alignment returns, effort dissolves. The body no longer struggles to regulate itself, it simply follows timing back into balance. Rhythm begins to change the nervous system most deeply at the moment control is no longer required. In everyday life, the brain spends enormous energy trying to manage timing, when to act, when to respond, when to prepare. This constant self-regulation creates tension, even when nothing is overtly wrong. External rhythm quietly takes over this responsibility. By providing a stable temporal structure, rhythm removes the need for internal micromanagement. The nervous system no longer has to decide what comes next. That decision has already been made by the pattern, and the body trusts it instinctively. This trust is not psychological, it is biological. The brain evolved in environments where predictable rhythms signaled safety, day and night cycles, seasonal patterns, steady environmental sounds. Irregularity meant danger. When rhythm is present and consistent, ancient neural circuits relax their grip. The system stops preparing for sudden change. Muscles soften further. Reflexes quiet. The illusion that control is necessary begins to dissolve, replaced by a deeper sense of timing being handled elsewhere. As control fades, awareness shifts. Instead of being tightly focused on managing internal state, attention spreads outward and inward simultaneously. Thought becomes less directive and more observational. The brain is no longer trying to do times rest. It is allowing rest to happen. This is why rhythm often produces a trance-like quality. Not because it hypnotizes the mind directly, but because it removes the need for constant decision-making. With fewer decisions to make, consciousness naturally slows. This slowing reveals how much mental effort is normally spent maintaining the feeling of control. When rhythm holds timing steady, the mind experiences relief not as pleasure, but as absence of strain. There is nothing to fix, nothing to anticipate, nothing to optimize. The nervous system recognizes this state as efficient. Efficiency feels like ease. Ease feels like safety. Safety allows further release. Over repeated experiences, the brain learns that control can be delegated without consequence. This learning generalizes. The nervous system becomes less reactive even outside rhythmic environments. Stress responses take longer to initiate. Recovery happens faster. The body remembers that it does not need to hold everything together consciously. Rhythm has demonstrated that regulation can occur automatically. So rhythm does not dominate the nervous system. It frees it. By assuming responsibility for timing, rhythm gives the system permission to let go of control. In that letting go, awareness deepens, effort fades, and the body returns to a state it recognizes immediately, not because it is new, but because it is familiar. The state where nothing needs to be managed, and everything continues on its own. At the deepest stage of rhythmic influence, the nervous system stops responding times to time's rhythm and begins moving times with times it. This distinction matters. Responding still implies effort, adjustment, and monitoring. Moving with rhythm means synchronization without awareness. Breath, heart, muscle tone, and neural timing align so smoothly that the body no longer experiences rhythm as external. It becomes internal timing. The beat is no longer heard, it is inhabited. And once this happens, regulation no longer feels like something that must be maintained. It happens automatically. In this state, the body enters coherence. Systems that often compete for control, sympathetic activation, parasympathetic release, cortical monitoring, fall into balance. No single system dominates. Instead, timing becomes shared. This coherence reduces internal friction, which is one of the main sources of fatigue and restlessness. Energy is conserved not by stopping activity, but by eliminating unnecessary correction. The nervous system recognizes that nothing is out of sync, and when nothing is out of sync, nothing needs attention. Awareness changes subtly but decisively here. Thought loses its role as coordinator. It no longer checks posture, breath, or emotional state. It no longer asks whether relaxation is happening correctly. That question disappears entirely. Consciousness becomes less verbal, less linear, more diffuse. The mind does not collapse into unconsciousness. It widens, then softens, held steady by rhythm that does not demand engagement. This is why this state feels both alert and deeply restful at the same time. Physiologically, this is reflected in stabilized brainwave activity. Slower oscillations dominate, but they do so without disruption. Transitions between states become smoother. Micro-awakenings decrease. The nervous system stops jolting itself back to alertness because rhythm provides continuous reassurance. Nothing sudden is expected. Nothing sudden occurs. The body trusts the pattern enough to stay with it. Over repeated exposure, This trust becomes learned behavior. The nervous system begins to enter coherence faster and remain there longer. Even outside musical environments, internal rhythms become more stable. Stress no longer fractures timing as easily. The body remembers what it feels like when regulation is shared rather than forced. Rhythm has taught it this memory not through explanation, but through repetition. So this is the final role of rhythm in control of the nervous system. Not domination, not manipulation, but replacement. Rhythm replaces effort with timing, replaces vigilance with predictability, replaces control with cooperation. The body does not surrender, it aligns. And once alignment is complete, rest is no longer something to be reached. It is simply where the system stays, following the beat quietly, effortlessly, exactly as it was designed to do. Music alters time not by speeding it up or slowing it down objectively, but by reshaping how the brain measures duration internally. The brain does not experience time as a clock does. It experiences time through change, through the number of events, shifts, and predictions it must process. When music reduces novelty and stabilizes rhythm, the brain has fewer markers to count. With fewer markers, duration stretches or collapses subjectively. Minutes can feel expansive and soft or vanish almost entirely. Time becomes less of a sequence and more of a field the mind drifts through. Memory plays a central role in this illusion. The hippocampus tracks time by linking events together, but music gently loosens these links. When melodic and rhythmic patterns repeat without demand, memories are no longer segmented sharply. Instead of forming distinct timestamps, experience becomes continuous. The brain stores less, when, and more how it felt. This is why music-heavy states are often remembered vaguely, without clear boundaries. The mind recalls a mood rather than a moment. Time, in memory, becomes blurred. Emotion deepens this effect. Emotional intensity usually sharpens time perception, making moments feel longer and more distinct. Music designed for calm does the opposite. By stabilizing emotional chemistry, it reduces the need for the brain to highlight specific instants. Nothing stands out as urgent. Nothing needs to be marked. As emotional charge softens, time loses its edges. The present moment expands gently, no longer pushed forward by anticipation or pulled backward by regret. Neuroscientifically, this corresponds with shifts toward alpha and theta brainwave activity. These frequencies are associated with inward focus and reduced temporal tracking. In these states, the brain prioritizes internal coherence over external sequencing. Music supports this shift by maintaining continuity without interruption. There is no reason to count, no reason to segment. The brain stops slicing experience into moments and begins to hold it as a whole. This is why music often feels timeless during deep listening. Not because time stops, but because the brain stops referencing it constantly. Without frequent checks against before and after, awareness settles into a sustained now. This state is deeply restorative. It reduces cognitive fatigue and emotional strain. The mind is no longer pulled across a timeline. It is allowed to remain where it is. Over repeated exposure, the nervous system learns this relationship with time. The brain becomes less impatient. Waiting feels softer. The future loses some of its pressure. Music has taught the system that duration does not need to be filled or escaped. It can be inhabited gently. Time becomes less of an enemy and more of a container. So music creates the illusion of altered time not by manipulating clocks, but by changing how memory and emotion mark experience. When nothing demands to be remembered sharply, time dissolves into continuity. And in that continuity, the mind finds rest, not because time disappeared, but because it finally stopped being measured. Music has a unique ability to loosen the grip of the past while simultaneously quieting the pull of the future. Under ordinary conditions, the mind constantly moves along a temporal axis, replaying what has already happened, rehearsing what might happen next. This movement creates tension because it fragments attention across time. Gentle, continuous music interrupts this fragmentation by reducing the emotional weight attached to memory and anticipation. When emotional chemistry stabilizes, memories lose their urgency and the future loses its pressure. The mind is no longer required to travel constantly between before and after. From a neurological perspective, this occurs because music alters how the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex interact. The hippocampus stores contextual memory, while the prefrontal cortex evaluates relevance and consequence. In calm musical environments, prefrontal monitoring decreases. Memories may still arise, but they are not immediately analyzed or judged. They appear as impressions rather than narratives. Without evaluation, memory does not anchor awareness in the past. It floats briefly, then dissolves. The past stops demanding attention. At the same time, anticipation weakens. The brain normally uses prediction to prepare for action, but music designed for rest reduces the need for prediction by maintaining consistency. When the future contains no surprises, the brain stops projecting itself forward aggressively. The nervous system releases its grip on readiness. This creates a sense of temporal neutrality. Awareness is no longer stretched thin between what was and what might be. It settles naturally into what is. Emotion is the key mediator in this process. Strong emotion sharpens time, carving experience into distinct segments. Music softens emotional intensity, smoothing these divisions. When emotional amplitude decreases, the brain stops highlighting specific moments as more important than others. Experience becomes even, continuous, and less segmented. Time does not feel empty, it feels spacious. The mind experiences duration without being pulled through it. This dissolution of temporal tension has profound restorative effects. Mental fatigue often arises not from activity itself, but from constant time travel within the mind. By reducing this movement, music conserves cognitive energy. Thought becomes less repetitive, rumination weakens. The system rests not because thinking stops entirely, but because thinking no longer needs to manage time. Over repeated listening, this relationship with time becomes familiar. The brain learns that it can exist comfortably without constant reference to past or future. Patience increases, reactivity decreases. Waiting becomes less uncomfortable. Music has quietly taught the nervous system that presence is sufficient, that nothing essential is lost by staying here. So, music dissolves the past and softens the future, not by erasing memory or eliminating anticipation, but by removing their urgency. Time becomes less fragmented, less demanding, more continuous. And in that continuity, awareness finds relief no longer pulled backward or forward, but held gently in the present moment, where rest becomes possible. As music settles the nervous system, time begins to feel less like a line and more like a substance. The brain no longer experiences moments as thin points rushing past, but as something fuller, slower, and more inhabitable. This happens because time perception is not generated by clocks in the brain, but by the density of mental events. When fewer evaluations, predictions, and emotional spikes occur, the mind stops slicing experience into sharp units. Music reduces this slicing. With fewer cuts, time feels thicker, less rushed, less fragile, more continuous. Neuroscientifically, this thickening corresponds to reduced activity in networks responsible for temporal monitoring. The brain stops asking how long something has lasted or how much remains. Instead, it remains immersed in ongoing sensation. Rhythm and harmony provide just enough structure to prevent disorientation while removing the need for constant updates. Awareness floats inside duration rather than moving across it. This is why long pieces of calm music can feel both endless and instantly complete at the same time. Memory formation changes under these conditions. Instead of encoding experience as a sequence of events, the brain stores it as a unified state. Later, when recalled, there are no clear timestamps, only an impression of depth. This is why music-associated memories often feel timeless. They are not attached to specific moments, but to moods and bodily states. Time is remembered as atmosphere rather than chronology. The mind does not return to a point in the past. It re-enters a space. Emotion reinforces this effect. When emotional intensity is low and stable, the brain has no reason to emphasize transition. Nothing needs to be marked as urgent or decisive. The present moment becomes wide enough to contain awareness without pressure. This is deeply calming for the nervous system, which is otherwise trained to move quickly through time. Music gives permission to linger. Lingering becomes safe. As this state deepens, impatience dissolves. The need for progress weakens. The system no longer feels pushed forward by the expectation that something must happen next. Time loses its grip as a resource to be managed. It becomes something that simply exists. This shift is profoundly restorative because it removes one of the brain's most persistent sources of tension, the fear of time slipping away. Over repeated exposure, the nervous system learns this thicker relationship with time. Even outside of music, moments feel less compressed. The mind becomes less hurried. Attention rests more easily. Music has not altered reality's timeline. It has altered how deeply the mind occupies it. So when music makes time feel slower, fuller, or strangely absent, it is not an illusion in the trivial sense. It is a genuine change in how duration is processed, remembered, and inhabited. Time becomes something you can rest inside, rather than something that carries you away. And in that resting, the mind finally releases its grip on urgency, allowing experience to unfold at its natural pace. At the final stage of music's influence on time, the mind stops monitoring duration altogether. There is no longer a sense of minutes passing or moments accumulating. This does not happen because awareness fades, but because awareness no longer needs to track change. Music creates an environment so internally consistent that nothing stands out enough to be counted. Without novelty, the brain has no reason to mark time. Experience continues, but measurement dissolves. Time is no longer something happening times to times you. It is something you are quietly inside. This shift is deeply physiological. Brain regions involved in temporal judgment reduce their activity as emotional and sensory stability increases. The nervous system no longer prepares for transitions. There is no next to anticipate and no previous to revisit. Memory stops dividing experience into chapters. Instead, it holds a continuous state. This continuity feels safe because it demands nothing. The mind rests not because it is distracted, but because nothing is calling it forward or pulling it backward. Emotion plays a decisive role here. When emotional chemistry is balanced, the brain stops highlighting moments as important or urgent. Without urgency, time loses its edge. The present moment expands gently, becoming wide enough to contain awareness without pressure. There is no rush to arrive anywhere else. Music stabilizes, feeling just enough to allow this expansion. The system no longer associates stillness with loss of control. It recognizes it as stability. As this state deepens, identity itself softens. Much of the sense of self is constructed around time, what has happened, what should happen, what must be remembered. When time stops demanding attention, identity loosens its grip. Awareness becomes less personal and more spacious. Thought still arises, but it does not anchor experience. The mind does not disappear. It becomes quieter, less central, less insistent. This is why music can create a sense of timeless rest that feels deeply nourishing. The nervous system is no longer spending energy tracking progress or preventing delay. Cognitive effort drops, emotional effort drops. Everything unnecessary falls away. What remains is simple presence, held gently by sound that does not change enough to require response. So this is the final illusion music creates with time, not that time stops, but that time no longer needs to be watched. Experience continues smoothly without commentary. The mind rests because it is no longer asked to manage duration. And in that release, rest becomes effortless, natural, and complete. Not all sound enters the body in the same way. Beyond rhythm and melody, frequency determines how deeply vibration travels and which systems it reaches first. Lower frequencies move more slowly, carry more physical presence, and interact directly with tissue rather than stopping at the ears. The nervous system interprets these frequencies as grounding signals. They do not excite attention, they stabilize it. This is why deep, sustained tones feel calming even before the mind understands what it is hearing. From a physiological perspective, low frequencies stimulate the body's somatic awareness. Vibrations are felt in the chest, abdomen, and muscles, activating sensory pathways that bypass cognitive processing. These pathways communicate directly with the brainstem, the region responsible for basic regulation and survival. When these signals are slow and consistent, the brainstem reduces alertness and threat detection. The body begins to downshift automatically. Relaxation is not chosen, it is triggered. Higher frequencies behave differently. They carry detail, sharpness, and directional information, which the brain uses for alertness and orientation. In contrast, low-frequency sound provides minimal directional demand. There is nothing to locate, nothing to track. The nervous system receives a clear message. The environment is stable. This stability reduces the need for muscular readiness. Postural tension eases, breathing deepens without effort. The body prepares for rest long before sleep arrives. These frequencies also interact with internal rhythms. Slow vibrations align with breathing cycles and heart rhythms more easily than fast ones. This alignment reinforces coherence across systems. When breath and heartbeat begin to synchronize with external frequency, internal regulation becomes effortless. The nervous system no longer needs to correct itself constantly. It settles into a shared tempo. Calm emerges as a side effect of alignment, not intention. Over time, repeated exposure to calming frequencies retrains baseline physiological response. The body begins to associate these sounds with safety and non-demand. Stress responses weaken. Recovery accelerates. Even silence after such sounds feels different, softer, less empty. The nervous system has learned that stillness can be supported, not threatening. So, calming frequencies do not soothe the body through meaning or emotion alone. They work through vibration, timing, and physical resonance. They speak directly to the systems that regulate survival and rest. When frequency slows enough, the body listens deeply, responds quietly, and returns to balance without needing instruction. When sound resonates with the body, it does more than calm the mind. It establishes a sense of physical safety at the deepest regulatory level. Resonance occurs when external vibration matches the natural frequencies of tissues, organs, and cavities within the body. This matching reduces internal resistance. Muscles stop bracing. Connective tissue softens. The body no longer feels the need to protect itself from impact or unpredictability. Safety is not inferred cognitively. It is felt somatically, as a reduction in internal tension that requires no explanation. This somatic safety is processed largely below conscious awareness. Specialized sensory receptors respond to vibration and pressure changes, sending signals directly to subcortical brain regions. These regions evolved long before language and reasoning. Their role is simple and absolute: determine whether the environment requires defense or allows rest. When vibration is slow, steady, and resonant, these systems conclude that there is no immediate threat. The body responds by lowering its guard. Alertness dissolves into presence. Resonant sound also stabilizes proprioception, the sense of where the body is in space. Stress often disrupts this sense, creating feelings of restlessness or disconnection. Low, enveloping frequencies restore spatial coherence by providing a consistent vibrational reference. The body feels located, contained, and supported. This containment reduces the need for movement or adjustment. Stillness becomes comfortable rather than restrictive. The body no longer seeks escape through motion. As resonance continues, breathing patterns deepen further. The diaphragm moves more freely. Abdominal tension releases. This deeper breathing enhances oxygen exchange and reinforces parasympathetic dominance. Each slow breath sends additional confirmation to the brain that conditions are stable. The feedback loop tightens gently. Calm reinforces calm. The system settles into a self-sustaining state of regulation that no longer depends on effort. Over repeated exposure, the nervous system learns this state as familiar. Resonant frequencies become cues for safety. The body begins to relax faster each time they appear. Even anticipation of these sounds can trigger release. This learning is durable because it is embodied, not conceptual. The system remembers what it feels like to be physically safe without needing to understand why. So resonance works not as distraction or sedation, but as reassurance. It reassures the body that it can occupy space without defense, that it can remain still without vulnerability. When the body feels safe at this level, the mind follows naturally. Thought slows, awareness softens. Rest becomes not an achievement, but a consequence of being held by vibration that speaks directly to the body's oldest language. As the body settles through resonance, the mind begins to change its behavior in response. Thought is not an isolated process, it is tightly coupled to physiological state. When frequency stabilizes the body, the brain receives continuous feedback that no immediate action is required. In response, cortical activity reorganizes. High-frequency thinking patterns associated with problem-solving and vigilance begin to fade. Slower neural oscillations take their place. The mind does not shut down. It quiets, naturally, because the conditions that sustain mental noise are no longer present. This quieting occurs because certain frequencies reduce sensory competition. In everyday environments, the brain constantly prioritizes signals, sounds, sights, internal sensations, all competing for attention. Low, stable frequencies dominate this sensory field gently, without sharp edges or sudden changes. The brain no longer needs to switch focus rapidly. Attention stops fragmenting. Thought loses momentum because there is nothing pushing it forward. The mind begins to idle smoothly, like a system no longer required to multitask. From a neurological standpoint, this corresponds to increased alpha and theta activity across large cortical regions. These frequencies are associated with inward attention, reduced self-monitoring, and early sleep states. Music that emphasizes calming frequency ranges supports this transition without forcing it. The brain is not being commanded to slow down. It is being given an environment where slowing down is the most efficient response available. Emotion also plays a role here. When the body feels safe and stable, emotional processing becomes quieter. There is less internal commentary, less need to label or interpret experience. Thoughts still arise, but they do not link together into narratives. They appear and dissolve independently. This breaks the chain that normally sustains mental chatter. Frequency does not silence the mind directly. It interrupts the conditions that keep it talking. As this state deepens, awareness becomes more diffuse. Instead of focusing on individual thoughts, consciousness spreads across sensation, breath, and sound simultaneously. This diffusion reduces the sense of mental effort. There is no single point that requires attention. The mind rests not because it is empty, but because it is evenly distributed. Nothing dominates. Nothing insists. Over repeated exposure, the nervous system learns this pathway into quiet. The brain begins to associate specific frequency environments with reduced mental activity. Each time these sounds return, thought slows more quickly and with less resistance. Silence after such music feels different, less intrusive, less demanding. The mind remembers how to remain quiet even when sound fades. So certain frequencies calm the mind, not by suppressing thought, but by stabilizing the system that generates it. When the body no longer signals urgency, the brain no longer produces it. Mental quiet emerges as a consequence of balance. And in that quiet, awareness is free to drift without effort, supported by sound that continues softly in the background. At the final stage of frequency-based calm, the body no longer listens to sound as an external signal. It trusts it as a stable condition. This is a crucial transition. Listening implies evaluation, checking, responding, adjusting. Trust implies release. When calming frequencies remain consistent long enough, the nervous system stops monitoring them for change. They become part of the background architecture of experience. The body settles not because it is guided moment by moment, but because it no longer expects disruption. Physiologically, this trust is reflected in sustained parasympathetic dominance. The stress response system remains quiet without effort. There are no sudden spikes in alertness, no reflexive tightening of muscle groups. The body maintains softness naturally, as if it has decided that vigilance is unnecessary. This decision is not conscious. It is the result of repeated confirmation that nothing unexpected follows these frequencies. Predictability becomes safety. Safety becomes rest. As trust deepens, the boundary between internal and external sensation begins to blur. Sound no longer feels like something entering the body. It feels like something the body exists within. Awareness becomes less localized. Instead of identifying with specific sensations or thoughts, consciousness spreads gently across the entire sensory field. This diffusion reduces the sense of effort and identity. There is no center that needs protection or management. The system floats in equilibrium. At this depth, even the idea of calming becomes irrelevant. There is no longer a state to achieve or maintain. The body has already arrived. Breathing continues on its own. The heart moves with steady variability. Thought appears rarely and without momentum. When it does appear, it dissolves easily, unsupported by urgency or tension. The nervous system has learned that nothing needs to be done. This is why frequency-based calm feels different from intentional relaxation. Intention still implies control. Trust does not. When the body trusts its environment completely, regulation becomes automatic. The system conserves energy. Repair processes activate. Sleep approaches not as an event, but as a continuation of rest already underway. There is no threshold to cross, only a deepening. So this is the final effect of calming frequencies. Not sedation, not escape, but trust at the level of the body itself. A trust so complete that listening is no longer required. Sound remains, but it no longer instructs. It simply holds. And within that holding, the body rests exactly where it is, without effort, without resistance, without the need to wake itself again. Sleep does not turn the mind off. It changes how the mind listens. As consciousness drifts away from active thought, sensory gates do not close completely. Instead, they soften. The brain continues to monitor the environment at a reduced intensity, prioritizing signals that indicate safety or threat. Sound remains the most influential of these signals. Even in deep sleep, auditory pathways stay partially active, not to analyze meaning, but to maintain orientation. This is why certain sounds can wake you instantly, while others carry you deeper into rest. The mind is still listening quietly, selectively, without awareness. Neuroscience shows that during sleep, especially in non-REM stages, the brain filters sound based on pattern and familiarity rather than content. Predictable, continuous sounds are classified as non-threatening and allowed to pass without triggering arousal. Irregular or sharp sounds activate alerting systems immediately. Music designed for sleep takes advantage of this filtering process. Its consistency teaches the sleeping brain that nothing requires response. Over time, the system learns to relax more deeply in the presence of these sounds because they repeatedly prove themselves safe. As sleep deepens, the role of sound shifts from regulation to maintenance. The nervous system no longer needs guidance to slow down. It needs reassurance to stay slow. Gentle sound provides this reassurance by remaining unchanged. The sleeping brain checks in briefly, finds no reason to wake, and releases again. This cycle repeats quietly throughout the night. Sound becomes a guardian rather than a guide, maintaining stability while awareness remains absent. This continued listening explains why silence can sometimes feel unsettling during sleep. Without a stable auditory reference, the brain increases vigilance, scanning for signals in the absence of confirmation. Music fills this gap. It gives the mind something predictable to rest against. The brain does not need to imagine threats when sound confirms continuity. Sleep becomes smoother, with fewer micro-awakenings and less internal disturbance. Memory consolidation also benefits from this quiet listening. During sleep, the brain replays and reorganizes experiences from the day. Stable sound environments reduce emotional interference during this process. Memories integrate more gently. Emotional tone softens. The mind does not attach urgency to what it processes. Sound acts as a neutral backdrop, allowing internal work to proceed without disruption. So even in sleep, the mind listens not for meaning but for reassurance. Music that remains gentle and consistent communicates safety without words. It tells the sleeping brain that nothing needs attention. In response, the system lets go more completely. Awareness stays dormant, rest deepens, and listening continues quietly, not to wake you, but to keep you asleep. As sleep deepens, the brain does not drift aimlessly. It follows internal pathways shaped by rhythm, memory, and expectation. Sound becomes a subtle guide along these pathways, not by directing thought, but by stabilizing the terrain through which the mind moves. During deeper stages of sleep, the thalamus, the brain's sensory gateway, reduces the flow of information to the cortex. Yet it does not shut the gate entirely. It allows through signals that are consistent, familiar, and non-threatening. Music designed for sleep fits precisely into this narrow opening. This selective guidance is crucial. Without it, the sleeping brain becomes more sensitive to unpredictability. Sudden silence, irregular noise, or abrupt changes can activate alerting systems even without full awakening. Continuous sound prevents this by smoothing the sensory landscape. The brain senses continuity and concludes that the environment has not changed. This conclusion allows sleep to deepen further, uninterrupted. Sound does not stimulate, it stabilizes. At the neural level, this stabilization supports slow wave activity, the hallmark of deep restorative sleep. These waves reflect synchronized firing across large populations of neurons. Synchrony requires trust that nothing external will force sudden response. Music provides this trust through repetition and gentle timing. The brain remains synchronized because it has no reason to fragment. Internal rhythms stay aligned. Sleep becomes cohesive rather than shallow. Sound also shapes dreaming indirectly. While dreams arise from internal processes, their emotional tone is influenced by the surrounding sensory environment. Gentle music reduces the likelihood of emotionally charged dream content by maintaining calm chemistry throughout sleep. The dreaming mind does not feel pressured or threatened. Dream imagery becomes softer, less narrative-driven, more abstract. This contributes to the sense of rest upon waking, even if dreams are not remembered. Over repeated nights, the brain learns this pattern. It associates certain sounds with uninterrupted sleep. The presence of music becomes a cue for descent, not just into sleep, but into its deeper stages. The system begins to rely less on vigilance and more on expectation. Sleep onset accelerates, micro-awakenings decrease. The brain trusts the guide it has come to know. So sound guides the sleeping brain not by leading it somewhere new, but by keeping it from being pulled elsewhere. It holds the environment steady while internal processes unfold naturally. The mind listens just enough to know that nothing has changed. And in that knowing, it continues its descent into deeper rest, carried quietly by sound that never asks for attention. Even when conscious awareness dissolves completely, the subconscious remains attentive in a quieter, more primitive way. It does not listen for meaning or language, it listens for patterns. The sleeping brain continuously evaluates whether the environment remains stable enough to allow rest to continue. Sound becomes one of the most reliable indicators in this evaluation. As long as sound remains consistent, predictable, and non-invasive, the subconscious concludes that there is no need to interrupt sleep. Awareness stays submerged. This subconscious listening is not a form of vigilance. It is a background calibration. Neural circuits beneath conscious awareness sample sensory input at low intensity, checking only for deviation. Music designed for sleep works precisely because it minimizes deviation. There are no sharp edges, no sudden changes, no signals that suggest urgency. The subconscious hears continuity and interprets it as safety. Safety allows the mind to remain disconnected from the surface. Importantly, the subconscious does not require silence to rest. In fact, complete silence can increase uncertainty. Without a reference signal, the brain may amplify internal noise, becoming more sensitive to imagined or internal disturbances. Gentle sound prevents this amplification. It occupies the sensory baseline just enough to prevent the subconscious from searching. The system rests because it does not need to ask questions. This process also affects emotional memory during sleep. The subconscious integrates emotional material without bringing it to awareness when external conditions remain calm. Music acts as an emotional stabilizer, preventing internal content from escalating into arousal. Emotional processing continues quietly, without spilling into dreams that might wake the sleeper. The mind remains asleep while the subconscious works undisturbed. Over time, this relationship becomes conditioned. The subconscious begins to associate certain soundscapes with uninterrupted rest. Its threshold for waking increases. Disturbances that might once have caused partial arousal are ignored. The sleeping mind becomes more resilient, less reactive to minor changes. Sound has trained the subconscious to remain at ease. So even in the deepest sleep, listening never fully stops. It simply changes its purpose. The subconscious listens not to understand, but to confirm that nothing requires attention. When sound confirms this repeatedly, night after night, the mind stays where it is deep, unbroken, and fully at rest, held quietly by patterns it trusts without ever needing to know why. At the final depth of sleep, listening becomes completely effortless. The mind is no longer aware of sound, yet sound continues to be registered in the most minimal, background way possible. There is no interpretation, no reaction, no decision-making. The subconscious simply confirms that continuity remains intact. This confirmation happens without content. It is not a thought or a feeling, it is a state. As long as sound remains unchanged, the system stays disengaged from waking consciousness, allowing sleep to remain uninterrupted. This is where the distinction between listening and awareness dissolves. Sound is no longer something perceived. It is something that exists alongside the body, like darkness or temperature. The brain does not need to attend to it because it has already categorized it as safe. Once categorized, sound becomes part of the environment rather than an event. The nervous system does not track it. It rests within it. Sleep deepens because there is nothing left to monitor. Physiologically, this state corresponds with maximum synchronization across slow-wave activity. Neurons fire together in large, coordinated patterns. Fragmentation disappears. There are fewer micro-awakenings, fewer transitions back toward lighter sleep. The system has no reason to surface. Sound has removed unpredictability from the sensory field. Without unpredictability, vigilance cannot re-emerge. The mind remains submerged. At this depth, even dreaming becomes quieter. Dream imagery loses narrative structure and emotional charge. It becomes abstract, fleeting, and non-demanding. The subconscious processes information without needing to project it into story. Music supports this by maintaining emotional neutrality. There is nothing in the external environment that requires symbolic interpretation. The mind continues its internal work without interruption. Over repeated nights, this state becomes familiar. The nervous system learns that it can remain deeply asleep even while sound is present. The fear of disturbance weakens, trust strengthens. Sleep becomes more continuous, more restorative, less fragile. The mind no longer prepares itself to wake, it allows itself to stay where it is. So this is the final role of sound during sleep. Not stimulation, not guidance, not even reassurance, simply presence, a stable, unchanging condition that allows the mind to disappear without fear. Listening continues without awareness. And because listening requires nothing, sleep remains whole, deep, and undisturbed. At a certain depth, sound stops behaving like something you hear and begins to behave like somewhere you are. The nervous system no longer treats music as an incoming signal that needs interpretation or response. Instead, it recognizes sound as an environment stable, continuous, and non-threatening. This shift is subtle, but once it happens, the mind stops relating to sound actively. Awareness no longer follows notes or rhythms. It rests inside the consistency they create. Sound becomes less like motion and more like space. Neuroscientifically, this transition reflects a change in how sensory input is processed. The brain reduces precise localization and detailed analysis, allowing auditory input to blend into a unified background field. This lowers cognitive load dramatically. The prefrontal cortex disengages further, no longer attempting to interpret or manage experience. Instead of tracking sound moment by moment, the brain holds it as a constant condition. This constancy creates safety, and safety allows awareness to soften without resistance. As sound becomes a place rather than an event, internal boundaries begin to dissolve. The distinction between inside and outside blurs gently. Breath, sensation, and sound feel coordinated rather than separate. The body no longer reacts to sound, it coexists with it. This coexistence reduces the need for internal correction. Posture stabilizes, muscle tone equalizes. The nervous system settles into a state where nothing needs to be adjusted. Stillness feels supported rather than imposed. Emotion responds to this spatial quality of sound by becoming less defined and less demanding. There is no longer a need to label feeling or trace its origin. Emotion spreads evenly across awareness, losing its intensity without disappearing. This diffusion is deeply calming because it removes pressure. Nothing insists on being resolved. Nothing requires attention. Feeling becomes atmosphere rather than content, allowing the mind to remain present without effort. Time perception shifts again at this depth. When sound is experienced as space, time loses relevance entirely. There is no progression to follow, no moment to wait for. Awareness stops moving forward. It rests. This rest does not feel empty or stagnant. It feels full, continuous, and quietly complete. The brain no longer measures duration because there is nothing changing enough to measure. Time becomes irrelevant, not because it stopped, but because it is no longer referenced. This is the state where rest becomes effortless. The mind does not try to relax. It simply remains where it is. Sound holds awareness the way a landscape holds the body, without instruction, without pressure. There is no need to listen closely or drift away. Both happen naturally. Sound has become a place the nervous system recognizes as safe enough to disappear into. And once that recognition is complete, nothing more is required. As sound becomes a place to rest, awareness itself begins to change how it behaves. Normally, awareness is restless, moving constantly between sensations, thoughts, and memories. It searches, checks, compares, and anticipates. In the presence of a stable sonic environment, this movement slows. There is nothing pulling awareness forward and nothing pushing it away. For the first time, awareness discovers that it does not need to travel. It can remain exactly where it is without losing clarity. Neuroscientifically, this reflects a reduction in attentional switching. The brain no longer reallocates resources between competing stimuli. Instead, attention becomes diffuse and evenly distributed. No single sensation dominates. No thought demands priority. This diffusion reduces mental effort dramatically. Awareness stops narrowing and widening. It simply stays open. The nervous system interprets this openness as balance rather than vulnerability, allowing the state to persist. As awareness stabilizes, thought loses its central role. Thoughts may still arise, but they no longer organize experience. They float through awareness without direction or consequence. The mind does not follow them because there is no need to. Sound provides enough continuity to replace the organizing function thought usually performs. Awareness rests on sound the way it might rest on breath, but without effort or intention. Emotion responds by becoming quieter and less personal. Feelings are no longer interpreted as signals that require response. They appear as gentle shifts in tone rather than events. Without urgency, emotion no longer pulls awareness into narrative. This absence of narrative is deeply calming. The system stops telling itself stories about what it feels. Feeling becomes simple sensation, evenly distributed and easy to release. At this depth, even the sense of "I am listening" begins to fade. Awareness does not disappear, but it loses its reference point. There is no listener and nothing being listened to. There is only presence held by sound. This is not unconsciousness. It is a state of non-directed awareness where effort has fully dissolved. The nervous system no longer distinguishes between attention and rest. This is why this stage feels so complete. Awareness has learned that staying is safe. It does not need to wander to remain alive. Sound has created a condition where awareness can remain without collapsing or tightening. Once this lesson is learned, the system no longer needs guidance. Awareness stays on its own, resting quietly inside a space that does not ask anything of it. At this depth, the mind no longer feels the need to return anywhere. In waking life, attention constantly leaves and comes back to the body, back to thought, back to identity. Here, that loop loosens. Awareness does not drift away and snap back. It simply remains. There is no center it must protect, and no reference point it must check. Sound holds the field steady enough that the mind stops rehearsing its own presence. It rests without confirming that it is resting. Neurologically, this corresponds to a quieting of self-referential processing. Networks that normally construct the sense of me monitoring, evaluating, narrating, reduce their activity. The brain is not losing consciousness. It is losing the habit of constantly reasserting identity. This reduction feels like relief rather than absence. There is no confusion, no fading. There is simply less effort being spent on maintaining a sense of return. As this happens, thought becomes increasingly sparse. Not because thoughts are suppressed, but because they no longer link together. One thought may appear, then dissolve without triggering the next. There is no chain, no momentum. Without momentum, thinking cannot sustain itself. The mind does not push thoughts away. It does not follow them. It allows them to pass through a space that no longer feeds them energy. Emotion mirrors this shift. Without narrative or identity to attach to, emotion loses its personal charge. Feelings become faint movements within awareness rather than experiences that belong to someone. This does not feel cold or distant. It feels neutral and safe. The nervous system recognizes that nothing is being threatened or demanded. Emotional processing continues quietly, without needing expression or resolution. Time perception dissolves further here. Without return points, no before, no after, no back to. The mind has no temporal anchors. Experience feels continuous and self-sustaining. There is no sense of duration accumulating. Awareness is not moving through time. It is simply present while time moves on its own. This is deeply restful because it removes the last subtle form of effort, tracking continuity. This is the stage where sleep no longer feels like something you enter. It feels like something that has always been there once the mind stops returning. Sound does not pull awareness forward or backward. It simply remains. And in that remaining, the mind realizes it does not need to come back to itself anymore. It can stay exactly where it is, without reference, without effort, without interruption. At the final depth, sound has completed its role and quietly steps aside without leaving absence behind. The nervous system no longer relies on vibration, rhythm, or frequency to remain settled. What sound built remains standing on its own. Awareness does not search for the music, it does not miss it. The conditions sound created have been fully absorbed into the system. Rest continues, not because sound is present, but because rest has become the default state. Neurologically, this is where external regulation gives way to internal stability. The brain no longer checks the environment for reassurance. Monitoring systems remain offline without effort. There is no vigilance waiting to return. The nervous system has learned that nothing is required to maintain balance. Silence does not register as loss. It registers as continuity. The system stays calm because calm no longer depends on input. At this stage, awareness becomes almost transparent. There is no sense of holding experience or being held by it. Consciousness does not collapse, but it thins. Identity dissolves into background function. There is no listener, no sound, no need to define what is happening. Experience unfolds without commentary. The mind is no longer involved in maintaining itself. It rests because nothing is asking it to stay awake. Emotion has fully settled here. There is no charge left to process, no tone left to soften. Feeling exists as neutral presence, evenly distributed and non-demanding. Nothing rises, nothing falls. The nervous system does not prepare for change because change is no longer anticipated. Stability feels complete rather than fragile. This completeness allows sleep to deepen beyond intention. Time is entirely irrelevant now. There is no sense of duration, no memory of sequence. Awareness does not track progression. It does not measure rest. It does not wait for sleep. Sleep is already happening without needing to be named. The mind has released its final task, witnessing itself rest. This is the state sound was guiding you toward from the beginning. Not dependence, not immersion, but independence from guidance altogether. Sound was never meant to stay. It was meant to teach the system how to let go safely, and now that lesson is complete. The nervous system remains settled even as sound fades into the background of memory. Nothing more needs to happen. Nothing more needs to be heard. Rest continues on its own. You can stay here,